Kamala, you don't really need any other Asians in the cabinet. And the Duckworth said, quote, that is really offensive. You wouldn't say we have white male president. There shouldn't be any white male members of cabinet. Why would you say that to someone from the Asian community? End quote. What is your reaction to her statement?
Well, first, we've had a range of conversations with Senator Duckworth since that call, which happened about a week ago, including a commitment to naming a high-level Asian American member of the AAPI community to a position in the White House. And that's something we're working to do through consultation with a range of officials and elected officials as well. And that person will be a commissioned officer and will be working on both policy and outreach. And as soon as we have a name, we will share that with all of you. But a big part of our effort has also been on taking actions to address the rise in anti-Asian violence and bias, and underscoring the commitment of our entire administration to working in partnership with the AAPI community. The president announced that DOJ has launched an agency-wide initiative to address anti-Asian hate crimes and acts of violence. DOJ is taking steps to strengthen hate crimes data reporting on AAPI violence, improve law enforcement training so that local law enforcement agencies can better identify anti-Asian bias. In the coming weeks, the administration will meet with AAPI leaders to hear their input and how we can play the most constructive role possible in the community. And the president raised, because he felt it was imperative to elevate the continuing threats, the hate speech, and the violence against the Asian American community in his speech he gave during a primetime address a week ago. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually a good follow-up from what Ching-Yi just asked, so thank you, Jen.
Sure.
So as you know, we've had a spike in carjackings in Washington, D.C., and there's been a huge uproar, of course, about the carjacking and killing of a Pakistani American by two teenage girls. Does the president plan any outreach to the AAPI community of Washington, given this uproar?
Well, the president and his administration, he's asked members of his team, senior levels of his team, to be engaged in a broad swath of leaders from the AAPI community from across the country. I can certainly check if there will be individuals from the DC community as a part of that outreach.
Okay, and given that there's been this spike in carjackings here in Washington, has the White House put out any guidance to staff who, of course, work in Washington, many live in Washington? Has there been anything on that?
I think we would certainly defer to local law enforcement and guidance along those lines. I'm not aware of any additional guidance being put out. Let me just go around to make sure I get to everybody. Go ahead in the back.
Yeah, well, during his press conference last week, the president was very stern and expressive when it came to expressing his opinion about the so-called voter suppression laws in Georgia and elsewhere. But what tangible action will the president take to turn that tide, particularly when you're talking about a federal bill facing an uphill climb in the Senate?
Well, there's a number of actions. One, I wouldn't call it so-called bias, because we know that in communities across Georgia, there have been polling places that have been closed. Those are in predominantly African-American communities. So I think that is real bias. Second, I would say that we don't see these. We certainly know there's an uphill battle for lots of legislation, but we are encouraged by the conversations that are happening about moving legislation forward to make voting more accessible, more available to people across the country. The president believes it should be easier, not harder to vote, and he will look for opportunities to help push that legislation forward. He also signed a number of executive orders just a couple of weeks ago because he believes that this is a central cause and equity issue in his mind, and he wants to take steps from the White House, steps any president can take to also make voting more accessible. But we also need to continue to work with local leaders. He met with Stacey Abrams when he was in Georgia just a couple weeks ago. A lot of the power and the activism is going to come from the grassroots and incredible leaders like Stacey Abrams, who are ensuring people have the facts they need, the information they need to vote, and that they push back against oppressive efforts to make voting more difficult.
How is the White House engaging the faith community when it comes to gun control?
Well, many members of the faith community have been quite outspoken historically about about the threats of gun violence that have impacted communities across the country. Certainly that would come from our Office of Public Engagement, who would lead these efforts to outreach to a range of communities. I can check with them and see if there's any specific meetings with faith groups in recent days.
And lastly,
Go ahead.
Is there anything to be read into sort of the rebranding of the Biden administration to the Biden and Harris administration?
Is it a rebranding?
Well, when you look on the website, it's it's just Biden Harris, and that's not been necessarily the norm of the past. Is there any message being sent by that, or what's meant to be what can be extrapolated?
I would take from it that Vice President Harris is an important partner. She's the first in the room, the last in the room on most occasions if she's in town and not traveling around the country. It's a reflection of the important role that she will play moving forward. Go ahead.
And speaking with several governors' offices that were on the call with the White House this morning, it's come to our attention that there were not a lot of questions or really any questions or pushback on the comments yesterday from both the president and Dr. Walensky, advising state and local governments against rolling back mask mandates. Just given the fact that there were no questions or really any dialogue, at least according to our reporting right now, what is the level of concern from the White House at the effect 24 hours after the president raising his voice on this? Dr. Walensky certainly raising her voice on this. I mean, are governors sort of going their own way and ignoring you all?
I don't think we see it that way, Jeff, but I would say that one of the ways we can impact people across the country is by acknowledging this is hard. We've been at war with this virus for a long time. And to reiterate, as the president did yesterday, as Dr. Walensky did yesterday, that we continue to be at war with the virus. But the way we feel we can be most impactful is not just through words, but is through actions. And so as we have seen an uptick, we've also taken an accelerating threat, I should say. We've also accelerated our response, and we've moved up universal shot date for most Americans by 2 weeks, increased vaccine supply to states, doubled the number of pharmacies getting supply, more than doubled, opened more mass vaccination centers. We know that the more people who can get vaccinated, the more accessible it is, the more effective we are going to be, and that's where we're putting our efforts.
Is there enough concern from governors based on the call this morning, do you believe?
I was not on the call this morning. I think the president's speaking not just to governors, but to people across the country, to business owners, to local elected officials. There are, even in some states where governors have been pulling back the restrictions, there are local leaders and local businesses or bigger businesses who have kept them in place. And it's important for people, it's a tough message, important for people to hear that we're still in a war with this virus and people need to still be vigilant in order to return to normal.
Thanks, Jen. Today, Canada halted delivery of the AstraZeneca vaccine. What does that mean for this administration's posture towards that particular vaccine and the vaccine's prospects of approval here in the U.S.?
Well, approval would, of course, be through the FDA, and they have a rigorous and thorough process for doing that. So I will leave that to them to undergo that process, and I don't have anything to predict about the approval likelihood.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Want to go one more?
Sure. One more vaccine question.
Okay.
Given on the near-term horizon,
Yeah.
is the White House considering changing the way it deploys those vaccines since those kick in so much quicker than the other vaccines?
The
out
Johnson
there?
& Johnson vaccines?
Sticking to the same per capita distribution, or is there any thought about changing the way those are distributed?
Well, we think a lot about how to ensure vaccines are distributed equitably across the country. But our message continues to be you should take any vaccine that is available to you. There are 3 approved. They're all safe. They're all effective. So we're not changing our approach at this point. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.